just fills me with delight that we're doing that. Okay. Let me set the scene. If you've noticed, I've been setting the scene, right? I've been setting the scene for these classes, getting us started, because there's something about the practice of ethics, whether we're doing it from a secular or a Western background or a Buddhist background. There's something about the practice of ethics. It's all about the relationship between particulars and some kind of universal. Like, well, what's the rule that we're following here, right? So I'm always starting with as concrete an example, a hypothetical as I can. Okay. A murderer is at your... and don't ask me how you know it's a murder. Maybe it's because it's Angulimala and he's got a necklace of fingers, right? A murderer is at your door asking if you've seen your friend, who actually is upstairs taking refuge from the murderer. So the murderer's at the door saying, have you seen your friend? Your friend's upstairs. What do?
You lie.
Mm-hmm. You lie. Is everyone like, yeah, you lie?
Yeah.
Why?
To save her? Protect her?
Yeah.
Potentially save life.
To save life? Okay. So what's the rule here for you? Is there a rule?
Words are immaterial.
Words are immaterial. Okay. Right, there's actually at least three precepts that are about language. So, but okay, yeah. So let me give you another example. Your activist friend, who is really, really devoted to a cause that you're also really, really devoted to, and it's a really unpopular cause in the current framework. In your community, in your nation, in your region. Your activist friend, really active in the cause that you're also active in, was just at a protest. You were not at that protest. The protest got violent. A policeman was killed. Your friend comes to you. Your friend is part of the whole organization. Comes to you to take refuge in your house. There's a knock on your door. It's the police. What do?
He's upstairs.
Get him up. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Honesty.
Give him up. That was really quick, Robert. Okay.
I'm sorry. It's like, if you cross that line.
Right, yeah.
Okay. A policeman was killed. Policemen are at the door. What do we... does that mean anything?
Yeah, we can't kill him, right? So if you know someone that killed him.
Okay. Taking the temperature, how do we feel about the average policeman responding to the death of their average?
Yeah, your friend's going to fall down some stairs.
Is that what? Is that? Let's just lay out the various things that might be running through your mind. The police come to the door, full tactical gear.
That changes
for a fact that if you're like, no, he's not here, and they're like, but we know he's here, that it's going to pop off worse than it would have otherwise.
Okay.
I think there's a possibility that there's some tactful mediation that needs to happen here.
Okay, so Robert's taking here. Robert's taking us into it, fleshing this out. What other?
I have a.
Yeah, Antonia.
I'm not sure. In this scenario, is our friend responsible for the death of this officer? I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
That's a good question. Oh, and I need one of those too. That's a really good question. Let's assume.
You said involved, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason you didn't go to the. There's a reason you didn't go to the protest. Okay. Let's just. I mean, I'm just making this up as I go along.
I'm like, you're adding things.
I'm adding things. But. Yeah, ambiguously responsible. Yeah.
If they have a search warrant, then I guess they can come in, but I have a right to remain silent.
Okay, so
you have a right to privacy of your home too. Yeah.
Yeah, do you?
You don't have to let them in, right? No, you have.
Okay, so we've got a sense of their laws here. Why? So, do the laws make a difference in our choice, in the ethics of our choice?
I think that needs context.
Sort of.
Sort of. Who said so? Wilcox? No?
It depends on if it's a just law or not.
Okay, all right, it depends on if it's a just law or not. So let's look at the idea of a murderer at your door. This is not a random example. And then trying to contrast it with a situation that's a little more ambiguous, and there's a murderer at my door, what do I say? That part I added. But this goes back to a debate at the end of the 18th century, 1797, between Immanuel Kant and Benjamin Constant. So Immanuel Kant may be a name that some of you have heard of. I had not heard about Constant, but philosopher, really powerful thinker about what we were talking about with deontological ethics, the ethics that's like about duty, right? How do we ground ourselves in the sense of this, you do this because this is what you do, because if we don't all do this, then where is the rule of law? So Kant wrote an essay in response to a critique from Benjamin Constant called something like On the Right of Telling Benevolent Lies, like the white lie, or the lie that has a good intention. So Constant, actually, since you brought up justice, Wilcox, would you mind reading that first paragraph, which is Constant's critique of Kant?
Okay. The moral principle stating that it is a duty to tell the truth would make any society impossible if that principle were taken singly and unconditionally. We have proof of this in the very direct consequences which Kant has drawn from this principle. The philosopher goes as far as to assert that it would be a crime to tell a lie to a murderer who asked whether our friend who is being pursued by the murderer had taken refuge in our house. It is a duty to tell the truth. The concept of duty is inseparable from the concept of right. A duty is what is in one man corresponds to the right of another. Where there are no rights, there are no duties. To tell the truth is thus a duty, but is a duty only with regard to one who has a right to the truth. But no one has a right to the truth that harms others.
Okay, so what's...
Depends who's asking.
Depends who's asking,
Yeah.
if they have a right.
If they have a right to, yeah.
If we think the policemen are gonna conveniently knock our friends down the stairs,
Yeah.
that might, even though they're policemen, even though they're people of law, we might think they're not being people of law right now.
Right. Their intention, their motive.
If there's a murderer at the door, another version of this, which I didn't use because it's just too, is, if the Nazis are knocking at your door and there's a Jew that's hiding in your house, which I'm not gonna use that example, but that's another example that gets used. These people are not just, they don't have a right to the truth. Okay, Kant's response, and I'll read this. To have a right to truth is meaningless. It would mean that truth becomes a matter of personal choice and subjective will to decide whether a given statement is to be true or false. Even though by telling an untruth I do no wrong to him who unjustly compels me to make a statement, yet by this falsification, which as such can be called a lie, I do wrong to duty in general, in a most essential part. That is, as far as in me lies, I bring it about that statements in general find no credence, and hence also that all rights based on contracts become void and lose their force. And this is a wrong done to mankind in general. So Kant's saying, if I decide that in this case, I get to tell a lie because this person is unjust, what have I done to the standard of truth and lies? And how did I decide? And who made me judge? I mean, he's writing this in 1797, so he's writing this in an age of revolution, right? Where a lot of people are saying, oh, those people don't have a right to the truth. We are on the just side. So Kant's tilting us toward a world, actually, and the two quotes that came to mind from a more contemporary setting, one was not so contemporary, but was from Jesus Christ Superstar, because I always have that soundtrack running in my head. So Pilate saying to Jesus, we both have truths, are mine the same as yours? What happens to the notion of truth if it becomes subjective? Mm-hmm. Right? Pilate saying that to,
But the laws are subjective anyway.
Well, okay, so then the next quote that came to mind here was Kellyanne Conway, right? Responding to critiques about Sean Spicer saying, yeah, there's a whole, it was the biggest inauguration ever. And her saying, you're saying it's a falsehood. And they're giving, Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. So,
does the truth serve? Right?
Well, what is the notion of truth meant to serve?
Right.
And that's an actual question. When we invoke the idea of truth, what are we trying to point to? Matt?
It's a sense of shared reality, I guess.
I mean, this is something that, you know, if we were doing this class like pre-Trump, that might not have been such an, like, immediate step to take. I mean, we live in a world now where, like, what is consensual reality, right? Like, is there consensual reality?
But yeah, I mean, that's what's so kind of beautiful about the whole situation is that it's really brought to light that, like, no,
There's no such
there
thing.
is no
Yeah.
consensual reality. Like, we may have lived under the illusion that we are, but anybody who gets into, like, a conflict with somebody that they love or something that's based around perceptions can tell you that they're very, like, inflated and also really fragile. They're so nuanced that agreement is very difficult to come to, I think.
Okay, so it's fragile, agreement is difficult to come to. What Kant would say about that, writing at a time that was probably in many ways just as scary, if not scarier than ours. You know, think about the toppling of monarchies in a world that had only known monarchy as order, right? And, you know, heads rolling. You know, I mean, this is like the terror in France. Kant's not in France, but my goodness. So, you know, Kant's saying, well, if my word isn't my bond, if we don't have some norm that we're just going to follow because it's the norm, and because we're going to say, this is what you do because you're living in this society, this is what we believe because we're living in this society, then what? Then what do we have? So that's his argument against the idea of truth being merely subjective.
I have a question. How can you separate truth? How can you separate self from truth and experience from perceptions and truth in?
Okay, so now you're sounding Buddhist to me, Meg. Okay, so here, let's get there in a second. Okay, so in a world that invokes the truth, okay, in that world, and this is going back to what we were talking about last time, we were talking. In ethics, we're talking about choice. You know, there's a at the door. What do you do? What do you do? Right? One of the things, and this is why I put the scarecrow on the handout. One of the things that choice is always about is directionality. Which way do I go? And that's what I think the trolley experiment or thought experiment literally shows us. It's like, do I go this way or that way? And even if you think about the words right and wrong, does anyone know the etymology of the word sinister? Yeah.
It was left. It's like where it means left in Latin.
Yeah. So if you're left-handed, guys, you're of the devil's spawn. I'm sorry to tell you. Yeah. So do I go right? Do I go left? Which way do I go? So this idea that choice is always about direction. It's not something that we actually have here. We don't actually know what the truth is as we're making a choice, right? We don't have that absolute, but we can aim toward it. Right? It can orient us. So you don't have to actually say, for sure, I have God I think I have God on my side, but you can say, I know God's over there. Or as Aristotle puts it, right, that the aim of human action is the good. Or what you set up as the good. By definition, where you're aiming to, he's basically saying, is good. So you might be Satan saying, evil, be thou my good. Or you might be, Augustine or one of the church fathers saying God is the ultimate good. Or you might be Anton Chekhov saying, my holy of holies is the human body. Yes, Chekhov. Being like just, it's all about here and now in my body. But there's something that you're aiming toward. Now, in Buddhism, we also have a notion of directionality. But it's different. And I think this is what Uchiyama Roshi's essay, Vow and Repentance, really leads us toward. And so right under the scarecrow. And by the way, Wizard of Oz is like it's a brilliant allegory for all this stuff. Just saying. The path, it's the yellow brick road. I'm just saying. Okay, so the two quotes in the box are just those quotes that from last time about the good and aiming toward the good and choosing life, that idea of ethics as being a choice and a direction and an orientation toward the highest good or God in a monotheistic tradition. But can someone read the quote from Uchiyama? Anyone care to read that? James, you want to?
Dogen Zenji writes, "The activity of Buddha is carried on together with the whole earth and all living beings. If it is not activity that is one with all things, it is not Buddha activity." People who practice true Zazen can confirm as actual experience what Dogen Zenji is pointing out in this passage as the foundation of daily life. Acting in accordance with the entire earth and with all beings is Zazen practitioners. Whole life, is a Zazen practitioner's whole life direction, and simultaneously it is their direction here and now. In Buddhism, this life direction is referred to as Bao.
Okay, let us unpack this. I mean, if you were here on Sunday for the Buddha's birthday, you heard the disco Buddha version of that, right? Mm-hmm. This is, Buddha, the little baby Buddha, pointing to the heavens, pointing to the earth, and saying, "I am the most honored one." But he's actually also, it's I together with all. It's a foreshadowing of his moment of enlightenment. I together with all beings in the great earth, in this time, am awakened. Right. So, what's Uchiyama Roshi saying here about Dogen Zenji's quote about the activity of Buddha? The activity of Buddha is carried on together with the whole earth and all living beings. If it is not activity that is one with all things, it is not Buddha activity. So what is that? What is he saying?
If the intention is separate self, if your intention is not the intention, if your intention is not for everyone to go with you, like there's no Buddha activity in separate self.
Okay, yeah, so if your activity is about, hey, me,
yeah.
me guys, this is not Buddha activity. What, James, were you gonna?
I think it's pointing to, making the decision that moves the needle in the direction of the liberation or the benefit of all beings.
Okay. Yeah. So how do the activity that moves the needle in the direction of liberation of all things, so that kind of orientation toward the liberation of all things. Can anyone put in just sort of regular words, what would it mean to say, if he's saying, if the activity is not together with all beings, it's not Buddha activity. Mm-hmm. Can anyone say that in non-Buddhist-y sounding language?
For the benefit of everyone?
If the activity is about me, then it's, combining.
What does it mean to be together with all beings? This isn't quite the same thing as doing something for all beings. Right. What does it mean to say, I'm doing this together with all beings?
An intimacy. Or
intimacy?
A connection or intimacy in which you make choices.
Okay. So something about intimacy.
Empathy. We're all in this together, but it's fairly Buddhist as well.
We're all in this together. It is fairly Buddhist as well, but it's also, I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. It's also a Coke ad from the early 70s.
What I do affects you. Yeah.
Interdependence.
What I do affects you, and what you do affects me.
So people who practice true Zazen can confirm as actual experience, he says, what Dogen Zenji is pointing out in this passage as the foundation of daily life. What does that mean? People practicing Zazen can what's the verb he uses? Can confirm as actual experience. This is not Cosmo shit, folks. This is actual experience. You can confirm it. Cosmo shit. Sometimes I'm like, what just came out of my mouth? What is he pointing to? We're all practitioners of Zazen. What do we notice about it?
By attaining the posture of Zazen and that as a form and a practice, that is a posture where the Buddha Dharma can flow within you.
Okay, but that sounded very fancy, which is lovely. But he's saying you can confirm it as actual experience. As actual experience, sitting Zazen, in as plain language as we can state it. You're sitting down, and one way to think about this too is to go back to our first class and think about the stop with Angulimala. Like you're going about your karmic, kicking up dust all over the place, and then you stop. The Buddha says, I have stopped, now you stop. You stop. The dust settles. When you first sat down and sat still for a length of time, and then got a little bit more used to that feeling, what did you notice? What was that experience? Yeah, Chase?
Just the world continues doing everything the world is doing.
And what about you?
Sort of irrespective of my involvement.
Okay.
Except that when I sit in that state, the world and myself are reflections of one another.
Okay, give me a concrete example of how you know that. Describe that experience. And it doesn't all have to fall on Chase. Because we've all sat Zazen. One thing I can say with certainty about every single person in this virtual space and this real space is we've all sat Zazen.
I mean, it's an experience you can't have outside of Zazen. I mean, I know you want that described. I'm just...
No, and I disagree. Yeah. This is an experience. Uchiyama Roshi isn't saying this is a wordless transmission beyond experience. He's saying you can confirm this in actual experience. What happens? Let's think about sound. Yeah. Oh, Jude, go ahead.
Sorry, I know I keep raising my hand like it's school or something, but just one thing I noticed today is it's been raining off and on all day, but it's only when I sat down and was doing Zazen that I would hear it start and stop. It was I could hear the sound of the rain, I could hear the sound of people breathing, and I could hear the sound of every car. It's just everything starts to exist so much more when you're paying attention.
Yeah, everything starts to exist so much more when you're paying attention. Have you ever had one of those moments where you're where the sensation is becomes a little bit fuzzy? Mm-hmm. Have you ever had a moment where this pain that you felt certain was somewhere in your body kind of disappears for a second? Or a moment when a feeling arises that you just can't even, an emotion arises, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. Where inside and outside aren't quite what you thought they were? Or where there's total peace. I mean, I assume we all have had a little taste of peace because we wouldn't keep sitting in these uncomfortable positions. It's like a taste of it, a taste of something that we're ooh, that was yummy. What's that?
Yeah, I've had quite a bit of that, but it does really kind of get wordless and formless.
Yeah, how do you...
And I kind of relate that a lot to the interconnectedness of everything. It kind of just all melts into one big thing.
Yeah, it all just melts into one big thing. So we confirm in actual experience that the activity of Buddha is carried on together with the whole earth and all living beings. We do that in a very concrete way, right? We sit still, and then our whole life is there. Have you ever had the experience where you sit Zazen and this wave of grief or regret or, oh shit, rises up that's from your past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is Angulimala having the dust settle, right? It's all there. Past is also, it's not just the whole earth spatially, it's all time. It's right here. Or I thought I was over that. It's right here, right? So we can confirm that. And Uchiyama Roshi says, acting in accordance with the entire earth and with all beings is Zazen practitioner's whole life direction. And simultaneously it is their direction here and now. In Buddhism, this life direction is referred to as vow. What do you make of what he's saying there?
And it kind of feels there's the different layers of thing, there's this kind of structure of form that we follow. Mm. But that structure is transcendent of that, we've talked about before, that it's not just hey, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna kill, or I'm not gonna speak falsely or something. It's like it's understanding that I will be doing that, and there's consequences. It's just like kind of unrolls this whole thing, and that helps us direct.
It helps us direct. It unrolls this whole thing. So we can confirm the activity of a Buddha in our embodying the posture of a Buddha in sitting zazen. Right? We can confirm that. But actually, what it would mean to live that's not maybe so present to us, right? But we've confirmed something that feels what?
I feel like that's what Robert talked about, where you can reach that moment in the form of interconnectedness and no separation. How can you cultivate that?
How can you cultivate that?
Outside of that.
So how is that like, let's just call this bodhicitta.
Yeah.
Let's just call this bodhicitta. That moment of confirmation. Mm-hmm. This is also the moment that gets enacted again and again in the Lotus Sutra, where the Buddha or some bodhisattva or some other Buddha is predicting the bodhisattva's future Buddhahood. This moment of confirmation, like, yes, I see you, and it's like, anyone romper room? I see you and you. I see you and you. You're all Buddhas. That moment of confirmation was like, this is the activity of a Buddha. So we have that bodhicitta. It's present. Now, how is that our aim in the way that, or in a way similar or different than the way that the good is the aim for kind of traditional Western ethics? Does that question make sense?
Yeah.
Our directionality in Buddhist ethics is that. Ujjayi Roshi gives that sense of direction, that sense of intentionality, that sense of goal, of aim. He gives that not just the name bodhicitta, he gives that the name vow. How is that like or different from, Aristotle saying the aim of all ethical action is the good, or someone, a monotheist saying, act in accordance with God's will, or act in accordance with the truth with a capital T, or there's a just cause out there, and I'm going to act in accordance with that. How is this, does this question make sense? How is this confirmation of our Buddhahood? Chase?
All of these things give you a target to aim for, but the Buddhist vow doesn't.
How so?
Well, I just mean, right, like you get to like externalize some idea of truth or God or whatever. Yeah. But you can't like externalize, if you want to call it oneness or like whatever label you want to use. You can't.
It's not out there.
Make it an absolute of any kind.
But it is out. So it's not out there. But we also know that we're not kind of hitting the mark, right? Like there's also, that's vow and repentance. Like oneness with all things isn't, how could it be out there, like the truth with a capital T, and yet I'm still a crappy person. So how does that work? So what's at stake here, is really the relationship between this particular finite relative being life that I know, that I live, and my sense of what transcends that, which I can't put out there. And what Ujjayi Roshi is saying is, what connects the relative and the absolute in the life of a bodhisattva is vow. It's also what the precepts literally embody. Okay? The connection between the relative and the absolute is literally embodied in whatever a precept, a Buddhist bodhisattva precept is. So let's look at a precept and let's recall, because I think it's really useful, this threefold distinction from from Norman Fisher's essay of the three different levels that you can read, understand a precept on, right? The three different ways of understanding it. So if you flip it over, this is from that essay, Quick, Who Can Save the Cat? Right? I mean, all of these versions, the trolley, the chunk, chunk, chunk on your door, the nansen or nanchuan holding the sword to the cat. These are all these moments of, which way do I go? What do I do? right? All these moments of choice and having to take a direction. So can someone read that first paragraph in Zen Precept Study? So this is just from that handout. It's actually, you have the essay, but I just extracted these. In Zen Precept Study, who wants to read it?
It is always noted that there are 3 levels of precept practice: the literal, the compassionate, and the ultimate. On the literal level, we follow the precepts according to their explicit meanings. Not to kill means not to kill, not even a bug. But on the compassion level, we recognize the complexity of living. Sometimes not to kill one thing is to kill something else. The network of causality is endlessly complex. Our human ideas cannot encompass it. We recognize that precepts will be broken sometimes, and we affirm that our guide for precept practice will not be literality, but compassion. We will follow precepts with a heart of love for beings. That motivation may sometimes cause us to break precepts in order to help someone.
Okay, so a murderer is after your friend's upstairs. There's a precept that says, not speaking falsely. I was trying to remember exact translation. Not speaking falsely. In fact, let's read that whole precept number, grave precept number 4. And let's read it together. Do people have their precepts? Okay. Not speaking falsely. The Dharma wheel turns from the beginning. No excess, no deficiency. One complete moistening of sweet dew, gaining reality, gaining the truth. In the unexplainable Dharma, not explaining one word is the precept of not speaking falsely. Okay? So, in the murderer example, to be completely literal when the murderer knocks on the door and you want to keep your precept because you just got the Raksu and you're maintaining your precepts because that's what a good Buddhist does, what would you do?
But it says that compassion is...
No, with the literal. Let's stick with the literal.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, if we're thinking... we're measuring different than what normal society measures, right? Like our measurement is of compassion. And so if you take that, then... it would change what you decided.
It would, but so here's what's so powerful, I think, about Norman Fisher's, and he's not the first one this distinction is pretty classical. This distinction between a literal level, a compassionate level, and the third level would be the wisdom level, okay? Or the absolute level, or ultimate level. He's pointing out, actually, we do have to start with the literal level. What does it mean to not speak falsely? What does that mean, literally? Not speaking falsely. How do you guys understand that?
To not say something that you personally believe is untrue.
So what does it mean to say that something is untrue? Unpack that just a little bit.
You witnessed something, and then you say the opposite. You saw someone drop an apple and you say they didn't. Okay. So you know the world to be one state of affairs, but you say it to your statement doesn't correspond to the state of affairs that you know. Yeah. Okay, so I'm a murderer. My name is Angulimala. Is your friend who I want to kill upstairs?
Yes.
Okay. Right. I know my friend is upstairs. I'm not your friend anymore. What?
I said I'm not your friend anymore.
Right there, we could fix it. It's they're not my friend anymore if I give them away. So there's actually a whole Jesuitical doctrine called equivocation about how you could say, well, if I gave them away, they're not my friends. So the true answer to that question is no.
Oh, jeez. What a...
That helped the Jesuits in the 16th century in England. They were after the English Reformation because they would be hiding out in English Catholics' houses and someone would come knocking at the door and say, is that priest upstairs? I'm by priest, do you mean... No, they're not upstairs. I'm telling the truth.
Depends on what your definition is.
Yeah, right. It all depends on what
That's
is.
Some Western philosophical mind game stuff.
Okay, right, because we know that Buddhist ways of thinking about this are infinitely superior.
No,
right?
I'm teasing. I stopped taking philosophy because to me it was just the moving around of commas and stuff.
But why a doctrine like equivocation takes place is because if you're working with a notion of a standard that is your aim for ethical action, but you can't actually grab onto the standard because it's by definition separate from you. What do you do? How do you manage in these particular circumstances? Because the Godhead, the infinite good, the summum bonum, the ultimate good is by definition not present. So how do you deal with the present? So there's a conundrum set up in a dualist framework that a dualist framework has to resolve. Mm-hmm. So let's go to the compassionate level. So from the compassionate level, I'm Angulimala, is your friend upstairs?
That's no.
Yeah. And why? Let's just spell it out.
Because he's going to be killed if you say yes.
And not only is he going to be killed if I say yes, but Angulimala's karma is going to get even worse.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
You have compassion for him. Right?
Yeah.
Both of them are harmed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're harmed because you persist.
And because I'm harmed because I've participated in all this. Right? Now, just to kind of put a pin in something to think about, one of the greatest power of the Buddhist non-dualist framework for ethics is this way in which the rug is going to be continually pulled out from under us. As we're standing at the door, hearing the tunk, 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 we don't have anywhere else to stand but right here. We can't abstract ourselves into the position of the Godhead, separate from events. We can't take that leap outside of the, do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We're here, completely bound in context. Mm-hmm. So the strength of the Buddhist non-dualist framework is, wow, I'm completely here, a part of all things. So I have to kind of work through this relationality. But that's also the weakness, because who am I to assess Angulimala's karma? Right? From what position do I figure out the true compassionate response? Right? And we'll come back to that dilemma in I think we'll see.
I'd be willing to wager that murder is not going to improve his karma.
Okay. Okay, James. I'll take up that later. Okay, so now let's do the next piece of this. The next, the third, the wisdom position. Who will read that on the third level paragraph? Someone read that. Matt, do you want to?
On the third level of precept study, the ultimate level, we recognize that there is no breaking precepts. Precepts can neither be broken nor kept, for they, like all that is, are empty of any identifiable self. When we understand this deep truth, we naturally want to follow precepts with a wide and flexible heart. This case involves the ultimate level of precept practice, the recognition that there is no killing, that life can never be killed, or to put it another way, that life is already dead. When we know life at this level, we can really appreciate its preciousness. It is this recognition that Nanchuan and
Zhaozhou, I think,
have, but that the monks lack. This is not just Zen talk, it's really true. We think death is later, but death is not later, it's now, as each moment passes irrevocably. But it is also true that our death never comes. When we enter what is conventionally called death, the I we have always thought we were melts away, but the I we always actually were and always will be remains as ever unmoving. Seen in this light, the precepts are ultimately not simply rules of ethical conduct, a list of do's and don'ts. They are possibilities for us to understand life's profundity through our conduct in the ordinary world. Practice of the precepts takes us to the root of what it means to be alive, to the center of the human problem of meaning.
Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of a mic drop moment.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So what's Fisher saying about the wisdom level, this ultimate level? There's the compassionate level, which is, sometimes you're going to have to lie to save this life, and it's not just that telling the truth is not as important as saving a life. It's that the compassionate thing is actually to save your friend, and the lying here is a skillful means for doing that. But what's different about the wisdom level than the compassionate level? What's different at that level?
Myobun?
Yeah.
For something that's just kind of striking me right now is it feels like I don't know if this is, I don't know how this is going, but because it's all there and not there, and just like one, that there's also sort of a level of like compassion we can bring to ourselves around it, because not like it doesn't matter, but there's a sense of all is well sort of inherent in what's being said there, and so that it points to the precious, like it says, the preciousness of this life, and it sort of brings a tiny bit of compassion and lightness to our ability to navigate these messy human lives by, like you said earlier, bridging that ultimateness with the very finite corporeal existence, and trying to sort of, I don't know, live fully through that. I'm not saying it very well, but
No, you're saying it beautifully. Yeah. So there's something about, this, whatever this position is, the position from which the cat is already dead, we're all already dead, but the cat is also not already dead. There's that recognition of how precious this life is becomes possible at this level that speaks from the far end of the precept, right? So if we look at what Dogen is saying, well, let's look at the first grave precept. The difference between Dogen's commentary, which I think captures more the compassionate version of things, right? Not killing. Not killing, the Buddha seed grows, and the Buddha's life of wisdom is reached. Do not kill life. So that's a little bit like this perspective that's, it's not good for Angulimala, it's not good for your friend. It's like life is what allows the Buddha seed to grow. This sense that we're all in this together, and because we're all shining brightly, the Dharma lives. Right? The next turn of things is Bodhidharma's one-mind precept. This is more the wisdom piece. In the everlasting Dharma, not giving rise to the view of destroying is the precept of not killing. Right? So this is no longer about the flourishing in an individual life. This is about this standpoint from the perspective of the all, where nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, and where what life is can be held in this broad, capacious space of prajna, of wisdom. I think it's even clearer, this distinction becomes even clearer, I think, in the commentaries for the fourth precept, right? Not speaking falsely, the Dharma wheel turns from the beginning, no excess, no deficiency, one complete moistening of sweet dew, gaining reality, gaining the truth. So this is actually a description of what we call skillful means. This is actually a direct reference to the parable of the plants in the Lotus Sutra, which is a description of how the Buddha Dharma is held by all of us. And not just by all of us, but by each of us. The way in which the all is particular. Does that make sense? Which is different from saying the all.
Yeah.
Different from that prajna, that Buddha eye perspective where it's like...
We still have onus, we still have responsibility, and how we...
Well, we still... There's a recognition, like the web of causality is a web of individuals, right? Who don't stop being individuals. So the parable of the plants comes early in the Lotus Sutra. And, as if you've been hearing Genjo's Dharma talks on the Lotus Sutra, you know that it's a text that's filled with story after story, parable after parable, in which the Buddha is, the fundamental topic of the Lotus Sutra is skillful means. Is this idea that the parable of the plants gives us, that each of us carries the whole Dharma, because the whole Dharma is carried by all of us. And on a very practical level, what the Lotus Sutra is explaining is and this is something that becomes apparent in chapter 4, in the chapter that I gave you with the story of the prodigal son, which Genjo also did a Dharma talk on. And we'll talk more about that maybe Yes, we'll talk more about that in a bit. But in that, one of the things that the Lotus Sutra is just at a practical level explaining is this shift in Buddhism from the idea of individual perfection and cessation in the way, sort of this arhat ideal of purification of the self, of like, I'm going to actually work on my own crap, like what Angulimala does. I'm going to work on my own crap, and I'm going to stop killing people, and I'm going to turn my life toward the Buddha. I'm going to be a disciple of the Buddha. I'm going to become a noble arhat, which Angulimala does. Good job, Angulimala. The shift from that is the goal of arhatship, or the Shravaka yana, the path of the Shravaka, of the person who is a disciple of the Buddha, who is cleaning up their act, purifying their mind, to the Mahayana ideal, where it's like, oh, I can't just save myself. We're all in this together, so saving myself can only happen because we're saving all beings. That ideal of the Bodhisattva. That shift, are you guys tracking me? That shift is carried in, and I didn't put this on the handout, but I put it on last week's handout. That is, or maybe the first week's handout, the shift in the pure precepts, those 3 pure precepts. So you may remember, like the pure precepts here, embracing codes and forms, embracing good dharmas, embracing living beings, that those originate in these early sayings of the Buddha caught up in the Dhammapada, in the teaching of all Buddhas, where the language of that is, so hopefully this will be reminiscent to you, to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to cleanse one's mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. So that's what we find in the Dhammapada, to cultivate, to avoid all evil. So stop, Angulimala. Stop doing what you're doing. That's the first step. That's the first pure precept. Refrain from evil. Embrace codes and forms. Adhere to the norms of society. Be a good team player, Angulimala. Don't go around killing people. Not my friend who's not upstairs. Honest, he's not upstairs. That's the first one. The second one, to cultivate good. And the third one is to cleanse or purify our mind. So that's the Shravakayana. That's the pathway of the Arhat. I'm going to purify. I'm going to stop doing bad. I'm going to start cultivating good. And I'm going to purify my mind. But that gets shifted in the development of Buddhism to the Mahayana ideal. So the next version of that, those 3 statements, what goes into the building of our 3 pure precepts, is to refrain from evil, to cultivate all good, and to free all beings. So that third one, it's not purifying our mind anymore, it's freeing all beings. So on a very practical level, the Lotus Sutra is a Mahayana text, right, from the standpoint of the Bodhisattva ideal, saying, wait, but Buddha, you preached this other path. Were you lying back then? No, I wasn't lying. That's like at a very practical level, the Lotus Sutra is explaining this contradiction. Like, we were supposed to be arhats, now you're saying we're supposed to save all beings? How is that possible? How do we understand that movement within Buddhism? On a very practical level, that's what the Lotus Sutra is doing, right? And skillful means is the answer. Well, because the truth needs to be held by individuals. There's no truth with a capital T, they're just individuals. So I offer the Dharma to the capacity that can be held. So that's a practical answer to a practical question. But skillful means is a much deeper doctrine, because on the sort of existential level, what the Lotus Sutra is about is the Shravakayana. This is the path of the individual trying to reach the ultimate. The path of the Mahayana says, individual ultimate, they're one. And trying to understand how both those things can be true, how both there can be individual practice and Buddhahood that transcends the individual. How do we hold those two together? Skillful means is the answer. Yeah.
So if tapping this on to the other piece earlier, the path of the Arhats is the literal interpretation. And the Mahayana is the compassionate interpretation. Does that mean that I, the great earth, and all beings attained the way at the same time is the...
So I would say I would say it's very interesting to think of the path of the Arhat as the literal, that literal level. Like, that's very tempting. I'm not sure that works, but it's very tempting. But I wouldn't say that the Mahayana path is the path of compassion. I would say that the Mahayana path related to the precepts is not the compassionate one, it's how I hold all three together. Okay? So here's the parable of the plants. To me, it's like one of the most beautiful teachings in Buddhism, and I keep coming back to it again and again. And if you think about, what's that Zen center up in Portland? Not CCO, the other one?
Dharma Ring.
This is why it's called Dharma Ring, okay? Parable of the plants. You should understand that the Tathagata, so the Buddha, the one who came thus, the Tathagata is like this. He appears in the world like the rising of a great cloud, and he extends his great voice universally over the world of human and heavenly beings. And that great, his great voice, the great cloud, that great is Maha. It's the greatness of the Mahayana, of the great vehicle. It's a greatness that we have to understand, and this is a very Zen way to say it, as a greatness that doesn't exclude what is lesser. It's a greatness that is beyond the distinction between great and small, or encompasses the distinction between great and small in a way that's similar to how our precept practice encompasses the particular, literal, as well as the compassionate and the ultimate. He extends his great voice universally over the world of human and heavenly beings, just like a great cloud covers the 3,000 great thousandfold world. Those who have not yet been saved will be saved. Those who have not been set free will be set free. Those who have had no rest will have rest. Those who have not yet attained nirvana will attain nirvana. It is just as that great cloud rains on all the plants, trees, thickets, forests, and medicinal herbs, and each according to its nature and kind equally receives the moisture so that it grows and develops. So too, the Dharma preached by the Tathagata always has one character and flavor, namely liberation, separation, that is the word for relinquishment, and extinction. So basically the whole path. So the Dharma is always the Dharma, just like the rain is always the rain. What is this image of this great moisture? What is it saying? We got a little plant, we got a great big tree, we've got a medicinal herb, we've got a noxious weed, not to mention all the little bugs. Chanel? Oh, see, there was a sound. That was the opening of your mouth, and hence, like the good teacher I am. Sorry.
I'm reminded of
Yes.
like how the Dharma is, he preaches, I can't remember how it's stated, but like he gives the Dharma to all those at the level of their ability to receive it.
Yeah. But it's not like, Robert likes baseball. I'm going to use baseball metaphors, right? It's like the rain, which rains on everything.
One which all can receive, yeah, but it's not personalized or specific towards
It's not that I'm saying, oh, this is your capacity. Let me just.
Yeah, but it's like some, there's been times in my life where I'll stub my toe and I'll be like, damn it, or like I'll get really upset, and then I'll be like, wow, wait a second, like that was a little bit of an overreaction, and I'll have something that comes about from that. While there's other times I could like sit zazen for multiple hours and have this totally other experience, and they're both of the same like sort of flavor, but they're totally different experiences.
Okay, so your capacity, what you receive at any moment, there's a huge variation, and yet you're receiving the same thing?
I think that's what I'm saying.
So, one way to capture this in the life of a Zazen practitioner is to think about, where you are now, even if you're just early on in your practice, versus where you were when you first started. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but there are like these moments where like, wow! And then you look back and it's like, wow, that was like a wow moment? Like, does that resonate at all? And yet that, wow, oh my gosh, I felt my breath in my chest. I remember when I first felt my breath, it was like, oh, wow. I look at that now and I was like, it's amazing to me that there was a time when that was something I didn't know and it was new, but it's not like the fact that that seems like I've grown in the path since then. That realization was huge. I mean, it was everything. It wasn't a lesser realization. It broke my world open. The classic Zen image for this is that the moon is completely reflected in a dewdrop. It's also reflected in the Pacific Ocean, right? But it's complete. The reflection is complete, right? So, how does this help us understand skillful means? Exactly. If the Dharma is like the great rain that covers the whole earth and all the plants, just by dint of growing, take exactly what they need. Is it the great rain's decision? Oh, the thistle just needs about 3 centimeters of water. That's why I'm saying it's not quite like, I mean, in the West there's a concept, a classical concept of accommodation, where I might say, Robert really loves baseball, so I will use baseball metaphors, where I make this decision.
Is it something like because the rain's gonna touch that, which is gonna touch that, which is, you know, like something like that, because if we are all affected by whatever, by each other.
It's all alive, right?
Right.
Life by definition is going to take what the environment gives.
Right.
I think an interesting thing about plants and animals is that their living by vow is a very much more natural order of things. They don't have to think about it or rationalize it. They're just kind of like, they don't like, besides like, I mean, I guess there are plants that like seedomes and stuff like that that'll just drink and drink and drink and drink and drink until they just die. But for the most part, most animals and plants just like,
Take
that's
what
how
they
much water I need. And, you know, there's
right.
the rest
Whereas
of it.
we're like, I need your water, and your water, and your water, right? Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting. I love that. And then there's this completely, encased in this example, is this completely just mind-blowing, really revolutionary statement, right? That, you know, those who have yet to be saved will be saved, those who have yet to taste nirvana will taste nirvana. Or as it said earlier in the Lotus Sutra, of all those who hear the Dharma, none will fail to become a Buddha. And earlier in the chapter, it's like, everyone's hearing the Dharma 24/7, because it's the rain. So 10 out of 10 get saved. I mean, that should blow our mind, that this is a vision of universal liberation. That should blow our mind. That's everything.
If one is touched, all is touched.
Yeah. All will be saved. 10 out of 10. How many? All of them. How many is all of them? All. Right? Okay, so does that seem a little mind-blowing?
It's almost kind of hard for me to like make that jump. I'm kind of wondering how it can relate to Ujiyama Roshi saying that through direct experience in Zazen we can, you know, we're like experiencing that, because the Lotus Sutra was written over like a 300-year period of time, and it wasn't necessarily the words of the Buddha. This is like people who are on the path, kind of developing the teachings. So I mean, I'm not disparaging or anything, but it's so mind-blowing that I have to use my sense of like.
Okay, why is it so much? What is mind-blowing about that statement? Why is that statement mind-blowing?
You know, as far as we're concerned, in general, like there's been one Buddha. You know, I mean, I know there's people who've gained enlightenment, and I'm not quite sure how that works. You know, when we like recite the like list of our ancestors, clearly these people have gained enlightenment, and there's a lot to that. But it seems really interesting that everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, how many lifetimes? You know, of course, like.
So if we picture, you know, this extent through space and this extent through time that includes Buddhahood all the way down, right? So if that's what we're being asked to understand when we understand what skillful means is. So skillful means is the thing that helps me make the link between the particular and the ultimate. Understanding how the Dharma is imbued in this moment. And if to understand skillful means, I'm imagining, that's what precept study makes us try to wrap our mind around. So let's look at the language of the fourth grade precept. So the first of the first chunk of the commentary is Dogen's commentary, and it is basically the compassionate perspective. The Dharma wheel turns from the beginning. No excess, no deficiency. One complete moistening of sweet dew. So there's the Dharma rain. Right? Gaining reality, gaining the truth. Okay, so what do you make of that commentary, and how does that relate to lying or telling the truth? What is being said about truth here? What's the perspective we're trying to hold in our hearts and minds as we face a practical situation? I got to keep the precept. How do I keep the precept now? Oh, the Dharma wheel turns from the beginning. No excess, no deficiency. One complete moistening of sweet dew. Gaining reality, gaining the truth. How does that help me? What is that teaching me? What is that asking me to hold in that moment? Does that question make sense? Yeah. So let's start with the idea that we're all equally receiving. There's no excess, there's no deficiency. I don't have more, I don't have less. There's nothing lacking. So what might I be thinking if let's bring it forward a different example of lying. Okay.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I just keep coming to this feeling of, in the present moment, hopefully I will know what to do.
Yeah.
That I've got,
yeah.
It's going to come up. That's why, speaking of meditation, I meditate so that I can be present and make the best choice in the moment. And the Buddhist practice keeps, like you said, all the things in my mind and my heart, so that when the situation arises, I can come to it with the truest.
Yeah, okay, but Yosin, that's beautiful. So, but here we have language that's telling you what does it mean, what is the truest, what is truth? In the precept that is directly raising the question of what truth is. So let's take a stupid example. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just going to throw out an example here. Your beloved or someone that you're really close to, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but someone you're super close to, puts on an outfit, they're about to go do something important, go on a job, and they're like, does this make me look? And it does. Yeah, and it does.
I still don't know the answer to that.
But how do I meet that moment? How does this help me understand how to meet that moment? What might the temptation be?
To make them feel good.
To make them feel good. And so from the position of, I want to make them feel good, they're feeling not so confident, I want to kind of bolster their ego. That might be a position from which, I don't know, I'm sort of seeing them as lacking, I'm sort of judging this moment, I'm kind of assessing what I think they need.
What my idea of whatever.
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, but how is this language of no excess, no deficiency, right? One complete moistening, how can that help me, how can that help teach me compassion?
I feel like one thing that keeps on coming to me is that you're just taking your karma into your own hands, and there's no and there's nothing that's saying hey, you do this or you don't do this.
Okay.
And that's real liberating.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about like, I'm gonna go to hell if I do this,
Yeah.
you know, because there's something watching me right now. It's just like, you have to abide in contentment with whatever happens. You have that option.
Yeah. So one way, and maybe this is a better example. One way to think about the no excess, no deficiency, and the no lack, right? The side of that is to think speaking falsely, not speaking falsely, fundamentally about relationality.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Myobun, you're talking about being present in the moment. I can't, if I'm thinking of an example here where, you know, your boss asks for some feedback and you know what they want you to say. You think you know. So, like, am I going to be in relation? Like, how am I going to be in relation to my boss? How am I going to manage this power situation? How do I work with this? Right? But we're being schooled here in the karmic consequences of this moment where everything in us wants to tip the balance one way or the other, right? Everything in us wants to say, there's lack here, let's even it out. There's excess here, we want to kind of, there's not enough dew to go around, right? Now, the ultimate perspective on lying, in the unexplainable Dharma, not explaining one word, is the precept of not speaking falsely. This is exactly what got the monks in trouble with the cat, right? The Dharma is so inexpressible. You ask me to speak a word of Zen, I can't do it. It's unexplainable. The cat is dead, right? So one of the things about the Lotus Sutra, in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha is saying over and over and over again, I can't preach this, I can't preach this. You can't preach this because if we go to the standpoint of the Mahayana too quickly, we're like, we're all one, then we don't do anything, right? Then we're like, I can't say a word of Dharma because the Dharma is unexplainable. The cat's now dead. But nor can we simply be Nansen, Nanchuan, and like blithely hold the sword to demonstrate the point. I think it's really important in the koan that there are two responses from Joshu. From like, you know, Joshu is sort of he's a friend. Nansen is his teacher, but he himself has the mind seal. So the first thing Nanchuan says when Joshu puts his sandals on his head, right? The sign of mourning, this recognition we're all dead. The cat's already dead. There's nothing here but the preciousness of life. And Nanchuan says, if you'd been there, you'd have saved the cat. Like, gold star, you just got the right answer. But then Mumon's comment, or I think it's his poem, he says, had Zhao Zhou been there, he would have taken charge. Zhao Zhou snatches the sword and Nanchuan begs for life. Which is a second way that Joshu is imagined responding. Like, Nansen, you don't get to just abstract yourself and be the person who, the personification of Manjushri. You don't get to stand outside of this. You're in it. No one comes away with their shirt clean, right? We're all in it. We all get cut by the sword. But along the way, right, there aren't going to be any shortcuts. I feel like I keep ending on the same note of like, it sucks to be ethical.
Yes, that's how it feels.
So maybe the best that we're going to get in our time together is to like get clearer on just how much it sucks. That'll be our goal in the next two classes. And we'll talk a little bit more about skillful means next time. So if you didn't look at the Lotus Sutra chapter, the Lotus Sutra has a narrative version of the story and then a verse version, so it looks longer than it is. It's the same story told twice. But I encourage you to read it. It talks about Sravaka Buddhas telling the story of basically a lie. Right? Okay. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Buddha Saranam Gacchami.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.